Hey Jason, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Good. How are you, Taylor?
I'm doing awesome. I'm excited to have you. We have a lot in common. Lots of cycling background and coaching and racing bikes, and specifically racing mountain bikes. So looking forward to diving into the conversation. I think a good place to start, one of the places I like to start with most people, is just having you tell us your story. I had the chance to read your background, before we jumped on here, and you got a really cool story of what got you into cycling and where you grew up, and when you got on a bike, and you told the story about a trip with your family to a cabin, and I thought that was super cool. So if you don't mind, maybe just start from the beginning, walk us through your story, and give us a recap of what led you to endurance sports, what led you to the bike, what was that like, you know when did you get excited about it? I'd love to start there.
Well, yeah, actually, my story starts quite a bit before the story you're referring to. So if you want to really go back, I guess
Yeah, let's do it. Let's go back. Let's
it's
start from the early days.
probably started when I was about 3 years old. My dad raced motorcycles, kind of for fun, not and more the enduro type. And I just, yeah, he and my mom had motorcycles, so that's all I wanted. And I would go to the races and and yeah, I would just wanted to be a motorcycle guy. And so come along, I had my little bicycle, and I had the little, I don't know if you ever remember those things. It has like a throttle, it made a motorcycle sound, and
Oh
so I
yeah,
got that when I was three, and learned to ride pretty quickly, and then about age five, uh, BMX started in our town, and this was, I'm aging myself here, but this is 1977, and yeah, some friends of my dad's, him and his kids raced, so they invited us out, and I was hooked the first time I raced. So for my fifth birthday, my dad actually gave me a choice of a motorcycle or a bicycle, but I think my mom had some influence on that, but I got the bicycle, yeah,
nice.
and then I was just BMX racing for till age 13, pretty much. You know, two two or three times a week, and traveling around, the Southwest and racing. So that's kind of how it all started. And then I did the typical high school sports, or typical if you lived in Texas, played football, um, and ran track and things. And then we moved to Arizona, which gave me an escape from football. And I think that's about when the mountain bikes first came out. And the trip you're referring to is my dad had a mountain bike. He had graciously given me the car that he had had forever so I could drive to high school, and he was riding his mountain bike back and forth to work. And then he bought the whole family mountain bikes, and we did this trip. It was a 40-mile ride from Show Low, Arizona to Greer, up in the mountains, up in the White Mountains of Arizona. And yeah, I don't know what he was thinking, but 40 miles, and none of us had really any riding experience. But my brother and my dad all made it, and then my mom and my sister got picked up in the sag wagon. We stayed the night at a cabin, and then we made the ride back the next day. So that's kind of where the mountain biking started for me, and then I got into a little bit of racing as a junior just for fun, and then really when I started college, I got into it a little bit more. So
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a pretty ambitious kind of first ride. So it sounds like first like ride of any real consequence or distance for the family. So your dad was a pretty brave man to like drag the family along and have the think that's gonna go well. Yeah, good on you guys for
yeah.
for like biting off more than you can chew.
Oh, for sure. I don't know what conversations my mom had with him afterwards, but in the end, we all had a good time, or At least some of us did.
Yeah, right.
So,
Sounds like the majority at least had fun.
yeah.
Um, that's great. Tell me a little bit about from college to. Um, I know you said like that's when you started to really get into it, kind of more hot and heavy, and uh, around that time found the mountain bike and got into that. Tell me about that and up through racing at a high level and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, I'd say through college, I had just turned, I don't know what you call it, expert level. And so it was a good learning curve for me. I mean, I had some skills, but I definitely didn't have any fitness, I guess. So I
Yeah.
was really good at the really short stuff. And I raced the Arizona had a great series at that time, and which is it's still going on. It's the Mountain Bike Association of Arizona, and so I raced that on some local teams and found some success in probably 1995. On more regional and national level as an amateur, and that was the year that I was graduating, or I graduated college in '96. And then I was able to sign a pro contract, I guess if you want to call it that, or that's what it was. But it was for this road team called Plymouth. Um, yeah, it was called Plymouth. It was sponsored by the Plymouth Car Company, and we had American Airlines and Killer Loop sunglasses, and so we were just there was like five of us on the mountain bike side of things, and so we just did a few mountain bike events and got to do my first World Cup that year, and it was a even bigger learning curve at that point. Um, just being at that level, coming from more of a local thing, and it took a lot of growing. I think it was probably 3 years before I saw a substantial result, um, and then yeah, just kind of did some bike racing for about after I graduated college. I was just like, I'm gonna just do this until I'm not getting better anymore, and never to the point where I didn't have to work except for maybe a couple of years, where I didn't have to have a real job. But for the most part, it was, yeah, you're a struggling cyclist. I think we called it the $12,000 club. That's about how much you made a year.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, no, I enjoyed it. I did race collegiately. The last 2 years of college, they started mountain bike collegiate racing, and so I raced my junior and senior year at Northern Arizona University, and that was a ton of fun, and yeah, and racing in general. It took me places that uh, never even dreamed of going, or being on a bicycle. It was a great experience. And my last year, I guess, as a pro, I raced for a team in Mexico, um, and that was a whole fun experience. I mean, you never knew what was going to happen. I raced the Mexican national circuit, and uh, yeah, it was just an adventure for sure.
Did you live in Mexico and like for that year, or how was that structured?
No, I would take a bus. I lived in Tucson at the time, and I would either, well, most of the time I took a bus to Hermosillo, which was where the team was based out of. And then we would fly from there, or yeah, we would fly from there, or I would fly from there. Usually the team would meet me where we were going, but um, yeah, it was always an adventure. Like I showed up in one town, and they just said somebody would pick me up, and and I think it was Ciudad Victoria, and yeah, there was a guy in a VW bus with a trailer with just bikes piled like 10 feet high on it. And I think six guys got out of the van and they're like, "Hey, we're here to pick you up." And so I squeeze in and we drove for 6 hours from that point. So it was, yeah, it was always an adventure. You never knew what was going to happen and what the race courses were going to be like. And, but they had great prize money, and it was actually financially better for me to do that than to race in the US at the time. So,
That's great. I I think it's I don't know. I love that you know one I so understand the learning curve that you talked about, right? Like when you move from like expert to pro, and then even you know as you get into that space, I remember when I made that same transition. You know, I was feeling pretty good about myself and had like won some races and you know done some things, and then had the chance to move up to pro. And same thing. I mean, I was just at the bottom of the barrel for years. You know, like I I just really got. It was a great dose of humility. You know, any part of me that felt kind of cool before quickly disappeared when I realized that I was like the least fit person in a sea of you know like several hundred people traveling around the world and stuff doing these races. So, you know, I don't think it doesn't get talked about a lot, right? Like everybody talks about going pro and it's this sexy thing. And like the fact of the matter is you kind of get slapped in the face for a little while. And like you said, you know, you don't get at the level that I was at. And it sounds like you're the same thing. It's basically just like, you know, just paid for bikes, right? Like you had to, it was a pretty kind of dirtbag existence, which was great
yeah.
when I was yeah, you know, I was in my yeah. Sounds like we're in the same similar experience. You know, you're in a place in life where that's great. It was super fun, but yeah, I think that's I'm glad you brought that up. You know, if I just even mention that or somebody knows about my history or something like, oh, that's amazing. Like you raced pro. I'm like, no, it was super fun, but you know, I was making pennies. Like I was fueling my workouts with peanut butter sandwiches and you know, like stopping
Yeah.
at gas stations for tacos and stuff. Right? Like it wasn't super glamorous. I was sleeping in vans, you know, traveling to races overnight and then sleeping in the van and wake up and race and stuff like that. So yeah, that sounds like your Mexico racing was kind of like next level of that. So that's super cool. Um,
No,
what was that?
oh, I forgot now what I was going to say, but yeah, it's definitely a passion project, and yeah, I always felt like I can always get a job, a real job. So I'm
Right.
just going to do this for as long as I can, or um, and yeah, I think I lived it out as long as I could, and yeah, it was a great time, and it was a hard time, like you said, but it was fun. I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, sure. That's yeah, same. No regrets. That was it was a cool experience, but yeah, it's maybe not quite as glamorous as people might imagine, right? You throw
No,
like you say pro and everybody goes to like Tour de France, and you know that's one type of pro, but there's a lot of people below those folks that are just scraping by the race. So
yeah.
I'm curious, you know, I guess kind of with that in mind, or you know, talking about being humble and just having that experience. What do you feel like you learned from your time as a pro? Like, what were some of your biggest takeaways, you know, for yourself personally, or you know, as it relates to how you think about training and racing, and I mean, ultimately the work you do as a coach? Like, what you know, what from that experience do you feel like you've kind of pulled forward into the rest of your life, and you know, what'd you learn?
I'd say, yeah, I don't know. That's a kind of hard question because I just feel like I was making all the mistakes, and now it's part of my job as a coach is I've made the mistakes, and it's trying to help my athletes not waste as much time on those same mistakes. Um, but I definitely learned tenacity and perseverance, and I don't know if I learned those things, but I took them to the extreme in, or extreme and from where I was at. That and that I was going to have to work hard. I mean, prior to that, school, as far as high school and college, it just those seemed easy at the time, and or it wasn't a big struggle to get through those things, and this was a struggle. Asking yourself why am I doing this, and I don't make any money, and those type of things, or when am I going to get good and are good enough that I felt like that a result that I liked. Um, so I think just persevering and those things are probably some of the biggest things that I took, and knowing that it's as you start projects, it's going to always take longer than what you think it is going to take, and just to keep pushing through those times of doubt, or those times of um, plateaus, and because those are always going to happen. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah. No, totally. And I agree. I mean, I've often said, and it sounds like, you're on the same page, that, the pursuit of training, when we do hard things like that, whether, it's committing to racing at a high level or just doing any goal that requires you to kind of go over and above what you're capable of now, right? You're stretching yourself, you're trying to find your limits. I've often said that, fitness is really like a great byproduct of that. But what you really get out of that experience is so much more, like over and above fitness. Like you said, it teaches you all these skills, or at least it helps you put them into action and refine these skills like tenacity and perseverance and discipline, and having to do the things that are hard and kind of stick with it long enough to see results. And I've always found that for me, that's really the biggest benefit of training, and sticking with it, is that you keep having to kind of refine that process and ask yourself, like, why am I doing this? And then en route to that, you gain fitness, which is cool, and you feel good about yourself and you feel strong, and you have those days where it feels great. But one of the things I'm remembering that you said was that you were self-coached during that process, and you realize now, or kind of felt like now, that was a mistake. What walk me through or expand on that a little bit for me, now that you have kind of both sides, right? You're a coach now and have been for a long time, but when you were pushing yourself, and you were in that time period where you were pro, you were self-coached. What's that perspective like now? Like, why was that potentially a mistake? And yeah, maybe like, what would you have done differently if you could?
Well, yeah, I think it was a big mistake, and it wasn't a mistake out of um, that I wanted to be coached, self-coached. I think it was more just I didn't realize that investing in a coach would be like investing in myself, so that I could have my performance in a certain direction. And so I did have one team I was on. We did have a coaching company sponsor the team, and so I had a coach for 2 years. And when that's what kind of started my interest in coaching. Um, just trying to ask him or read more about why I was doing certain things. think that's about the time that Joe Friel came out with, the mountain bike training Bible. Um, and yeah, because when you're self coaching, at least, I don't even know, I didn't have access to the internet so much like we do now. And it was like, you're reading an article in Bicycling Magazine, and Ned Overend wrote the article, and you're like, oh, well, he does this, this, and this. And then I'm like, all right, I'm going to do that. And then,
Yep.
2 months down the line, it's like, you're reading another article about, John Tomac or something. And, and so you change again. And so I think, a lot of my writing was kind of based on those type of things where it didn't really have any direction. It was more this shoot from the hip. And I think that going back to that coach that I had, I really enjoyed it. I would get a letter or an envelope once a month with a page of the training plan for the month, and it was exciting. And then I would call him, and I got the plan, and we kind of go over it. And I felt inspired and really enjoyed that process. And then when that team ended, and he said he couldn't give free coaching anymore, and he was asking for, like, I don't know, something ridiculously low, but $50 a month or something. And I look back on that now, and I was like, how could I not pay that? Or just, but because I think I should have done that versus, trying to write my own training and basically just going and riding every day. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I made was not writing enough.
Mm.
Now that I look at a lot of riders and are at the elite level and how much they ride, I was maybe 12 to 15 hours a week, on
Hmm.
average.
Hmm.
So it never really big. So
Yeah. What did that training approach consist of? Those 12 to 15 hours. What were you doing?
if I can remember right, the Ned Overend thing, I would go to one hill that we had near us. I lived in Flagstaff, Arizona at the time. We had this Mars Hill, and it was about 3.5, 4 minutes to the top. And I would go up and down that 5 times, basically making myself just cry, just going as hard as you can. Let's say I did that on Tuesday, and then maybe Wednesday I go out and ride for a couple hours, and then maybe an endurance day Wednesday, and then Friday go out and do some sprints, and then Saturday go on a group ride, and then Sunday go for just a longer mountain bike ride. So it's probably something to that effect.
Yeah. It's so funny. Our experiences are so similar. I remember so clearly, like you said, getting the bicycling magazine and looking for like the training tips from Ned or Tomac, and being like, that was the gospel, like, all right, I'm gonna do that every week until I get some other new piece of advice, and yeah, it was hill sprints or whatever it was, basic stuff. And yeah, I had a coach for a team that I worked with. Same thing. It was my first exposure to a coach, and he would just write on a sheet of um, computer paper that week's training. And he was a mechanic at a bike shop in the town that I was living in, and I was riding my bike everywhere just to get miles and stuff. So I'd swing by the bike shop, pick up the sheet of computer paper on Monday morning, and then that was it for the week, and it'd be whatever it was supposed to be. And same thing, rinse and repeat. And I'd chat with him for a second about the training. He'd be like truing wheels or, just doing stuff in the bike shop and working in the mechanics bench. And I'd be like, okay, great, good. And so that was my first, and it was super exciting. I'd just been totally winging it before then, and had no clue what I was doing. And that was my first exposure. And truthfully, like, I'm not really convinced he had a much clue what he was doing, but it was fun. And, I was young and it seemed to get results. It was a little bit of structure that gave me something to focus on. So, yeah, that's great. I remember that so clearly. It was
Where
good
were you
times.
located at during that time?
During that time, I was in Charleston, South Carolina. So that's where I'm from originally. And yeah, I had started racing there, and I got picked up by this. So yeah, fast forward, same thing. Raced a bunch of regional stuff, um, and got picked up by this team. It was kind of like a southeastern mountain biking team. So we would just kind of travel all over. Like we'd go up north, a lot of stuff in northern Georgia. And then there was a really vibrant mountain bike scene there, and some like pretty strong, like, endurance races, a lot of XC events. And then same thing in like North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, you got into the mountains there, and there was a pretty vibrant community there. And so, yeah, anyway, that was part of that race team. This guy worked for the bike shop who was coaching, and yeah, it was in that area. And I was working in a bike shop too. Same, I was, I would race every weekend basically. I mean, we were gone or group ride going somewhere, and so I'd work at the bike shop Monday through Friday morning, and we'd haul off in a van on Friday afternoon and drive to the race, and race Saturday, come back Sunday, clean our bikes up, get tuned up, pick up my training plan Monday morning on my sheet of paper, do that, rinse and repeat, and yeah, I mean, we did that. The East Coast is, for the most part, right, there's not really a winter. So the season lasted forever. You really only stopped in like January and February. And even then there was some winter races that were like notoriously crappy, right? And you would do those because it'd be like sleet or snow or whatever. And but yeah, no, it was a blast. Did that for years, and yeah, like you said, till I kind of maxed out, and and I got married and was anyway, but it was great. It was a great ride for several years. That was it. Just rinse and repeat. And I was pumped. I got some nice bikes. I got my travel paid for. Yeah, and like a couple of bucks, and I worked at the bike shop, and that was it. That was all I needed at that time. Yeah, I learned a lot, like you said. But yeah, I did the same thing when that team kind of ended up dissolving after a few years or a couple years, and yeah, I lost the coach. Same thing. He was like, yeah, if you give me like $25, I'll keep writing your training, and I was like, oh, I can't do it or whatever. I made up some BS excuse, and yeah, big mistake. I mean, I'd learned some, and I'd also started to like coach some people by that time. But yeah, I mean, I should have stuck with it for sure. That was a mistake. My performance definitely declined when I was left to my own devices. I'd end up doing something or not being accountable or doing more, doing less, whatever. Yeah. What you mentioned one of your kind of takeaways. So like the aggregate of all that, you went through racing and came out the other side of that, and you'd gotten some opportunities to do some coaching and started working with folks, athletes you had met. And one of the things that struck me that I thought was really cool was you said you had kind of taken on like the Bruce Lee approach of how you manage these different philosophies and all these things that you had kind of taken in, and different coaching groups you had worked for, and yeah, like expand on that for me. I mean, what was that process? Because it's you and I are both coaches and been coaches for a long time, and this space can be pretty dogmatic, right? It's pretty like a lot of people have really hard and fast rules about like how you do things, and this is the only way. And if you don't do it this way, it's not right, and you're going to fail, or whatever the language is. And sounds to me like you kind of, pulled from these experiences personally, professionally, and then really worked to like adapt and just apply what you had learned and make sure that you're just kind of paying attention to the individual scenario. But yeah, walk me through that. Like, what does that Bruce Lee approach mean for you? How has it taken shape? What's that done for your kind of philosophy on coaching and training? And I'd love to hear more about that.
I guess it came about from a bunch of different things, but I worked for a company and they had a very dogmatic approach and everything was about that. Kind of that steady state, sweet spot training that you hear a lot about. And I really, I just kind of stayed there. I wasn't investigating other types of coaching or philosophies or, it was basically we're right, everybody else is wrong. And so I just never, I wasn't curious about it, I guess. And so when I went off on my own and started my company, that was the first thing. And not that I just automatically started taking other philosophies. I just think I started reading more and not necessarily on purpose to change philosophies and things like that. But I had also noticed with some of my athletes that I had changed some things that we were doing. Um, and I noticed that they were positive for the athletes, that we weren't doing the same thing over and over, which makes total sense to me now. But at the time, it kind of opened my eyes a little bit. Like one of my athletes, he, as an example, I think he had a baby, and so his life was changing quite a bit. And he was a professional road racer, and so his hours went down quite a bit, to maybe 15 hours a week, where he'd been riding 25, 30, and and so we changed things quite a bit for him so that he could get the most done. And it was a lot of high intensity work that he was doing, but lower volume. And at the time, I mean, that worked awesome for him because he had one of his most successful years. And he wasn't, and he had a change of teams that year. He actually, I don't remember. He had just come back from Europe and he was racing for an American team in the Southeast, and I forget which team it was. Um, but he was doing a lot of crit racing, so it kind of fit into that crit racing. It doesn't. There's not a lot of kilojoules being spent on a crit race, so or in comparison to a world tour race or a U23 race or something to that effect. But um, I kind of got lost where we were talking about, but I'm kind of coming back to it. But I had these experiences, whether it was me from professional development or me with some more longer term athletes, because I think the longer you coach somebody, I started to experience these differences in the way the athletes are responding to some of the training and then also just our interaction. So especially with this athlete, I started coaching him when he was 18 and coached him through his retirement. So just to see his changes and the way our relationship changed and the way I coached him change, just kind of brought to light a lot of things that, you know, that I do think you need to have a strategy with your athletes, but that strategy can have different types of philosophies, even if it's like different during the year or different from year to year. Um, I think just as long as that you stay focused and it's not, you're not shooting from the hip. Like I
Mm-hmm.
did when I was training, it was more planned out from a structure standpoint. So, and then, going back to Bruce Lee, I mean, just reading more about him. I'd always been a fan, but I really, during this time that I had started my own company, I'd started reading lots of different books, but picking up one of his books, I think it's called The Artist Way, and then realizing or just understanding how he didn't have any dogma either. And it was more like he's taking different parts of fighting techniques and being able to apply them at different situations when they were appropriate, and not just sticking to, I'm just going to do this one type of technique all the time and I'm not allowed to do anything else. So I really feel like you just open up yourself to new ideas and see what the possibilities are. And that now I find myself leaning more into that as far as like looking at the athlete from a whole and what they've done in the past. And, whether we worked together or they were doing their own thing or with some other coach. And then, how can we, spark change in this person? Sometimes it's just changing something. And then mentally, the athlete gets excited about it. And it may not have, that may be the biggest effect. It's just a mental thing. But yeah, maybe that was a long answer to your question again, but as I'm rambling on, but yeah, I don't have a specific dogma, and I really like to read about people's different ideas. Um, if you don't mind, I have one other example.
Yeah, no,
I don't know if
I
I'm
love
making
hearing about
sense,
no, you
but
yeah, no, please share. I love hearing about this approach. I think
um,
it's great. So go on.
one of the most uh, influential um, things that I read, and it was influential just even in the past couple of years. Um, Killian Jornet, or
Yeah.
yeah, he wrote this manifesto a couple of years ago on his training, and it was just remarkable to me that he laid out what he did all year, and then just how his philosophy of training is goes basically on how he's kind of feeling day to day. And maybe he has an overall general plan of what he's wanting to accomplish, but he's gonna just know himself and kind of go from there, as far as what he's going to do on that day. And just to have the confidence in yourself to even put that out there, I just thought was incredible. And so, after reading that, I've really kind of focused on trying to help athletes. Not that I didn't do this so much before, but I talk about it more with athletes now. It's just is to know thyself, and try to get them to learn to feel what tempo feels like, or know what that zone 2 is, or know what zone 5, or whatever you're trying to do, trying to accomplish. So I think that helps athletes more than anything, is just beginning to learn more about themselves and know what they can do versus just staring at a heart rate monitor or power. And I think that data is good to have that, but I also don't think that it's something that we should all be relying on all the time. I think it can limit us at some point. So um,
Hmm.
I kind of 2 years ago, I was invited to ride with an athlete at Leadville, and so I used uh, Killian's model for my model of training myself, and I went back and I trained myself for a year, and I had one of my coaches, Rose Grant, I I had her, kind of be my second eyes on the schedule and kind of hold me accountable. But I kind of wrote everything out and then I would explain everything to her and then so that she could understand what I was doing. Um, but yeah, I really followed just some general principles of what I wanted to do, from month to month. Um, and yeah, it was a good time it was a good time for me training. It wasn't like highly structured. And I had just certain things I was trying to accomplish in certain time periods and then just go and do those things. And yeah, I felt confident, going in and helping my athletes. So
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you sharing that. I think that's, yeah. I mean, personally, I think we need more more of that. In general, in the coaching space and in the athletic, from the athlete side of things, and there is certainly, while I think to your point, while it's valuable, the hyper reliance on the data, I think has really taken some of the really core aspects of that athlete experience away. To your point, where it all that, if you don't know yourself, if you don't know what it feels like to do produce a specific power or maintain a heart rate, or if you're not tapped into that, even to tie it back to metrics, like if you're not tapped into the RPE of it, um, I think that's a big loss. I think we have to really be aware of what it feels like in our bodies to do these workouts, and to tie it back to that. And then I love the flexibility piece. I mean, I try to implement that with athletes I work with, and I definitely implement that in my own training, where there is a bit of there are goals and there's periodization and there's some structure, but there's also flexibility day to day, so that you can show up. And I can't tell you how many times, and be interested if you've had a similar experience where you know I want to do certain types of sessions, or I have some goals for the week, but when I do those sessions are more flexible, and I've had more breakthrough performances and great days by just allowing myself to kind of show up in alignment with how I'm feeling, instead of being like, okay, this session happens on Tuesday. Well, maybe, I didn't sleep well and I got a busy day, and, I forgot to drink water, whatever. Right. And like, but maybe Wednesday, I, it feels like the right day for it. And so I show up and I give myself the chance, and, or even vice versa. I've had it happen in the other direction where maybe I didn't feel that great going into a workout, but I kind of give myself the opportunity to show up, and I'm like, I don't know, let's see how it goes. And I get moving and I'm like, oh, I actually feel pretty good, and it ends up being a great workout, or, whether it's a ride or a run or strength training or whatever. So yeah, I really appreciate you like bringing that to light. I think that there is a lot of opportunity for us to kind of to take all of the access to information we have, and but make sure that ties back to kind of like the athlete experience and how you feel, and making sure we're not turning a blind eye to just knowing how it feels in your body to do this thing, right? Like we are moving our body, through space, right? We're exerting our energy, and I think making sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that we are fueling our body as a machine to do these things. And I think there's a mind body connection there that's important. So I don't know if have you like, does that resonate? Have we had different experiences, or is that similar to what like you're describing?
yeah, no, that's exactly the way it is. And it's just, I think the hardest part is just giving yourself a little grace, I get if you want to call it that, but being okay with that, the fact that you don't feel good that day. Um, and and maybe you don't do the workout that you had scheduled and you go and you just ride for 30 minutes and then you come back and you're like, all right, I'm gonna rehydrate or whatever, and I'm going to be ready for this tomorrow. So I do think it helps having that second eyes or that accountability on there. Um, but at the same time, I do think that it's important for the athletes to learn that because it's not a recipe. I think
Hmm.
a lot of athletes come to me and they're like, "Oh, if I just do this, this, and this every day, then I'm just going to get better." And there's some truth to that, but there's also means that just because you do everything every single day doesn't mean that it's going to equal so and so. It's not like a cookie recipe. There's more about it. There's more things that you're having to look into, as far as your fatigue levels and how you're feeling, and just I think you'll get a lot more out of it if you are able to know yourself and to go off of that. And I actually coach one athlete like that now. It's like I just put notes at the beginning of the week on his program. I'm like, hey, this is our goals for the week. It could be a goal of volume. It could be, if we're getting specific, um, or specific to some event, it could be a goal of, hey, 2 of the days this week, I want you to do these intervals. Try to be recovered before you get to the interval days. And he's had great success. And yeah, we talk when we need to and follow the notes. And then I check in, I see his workouts every day and I'll make sure he's not doing too much, having some recovery and making sure that. But yeah, that's been a fun experience. And I'm glad um, that I just thought it would fit him and his personality well. I'm glad that he's gone through with it. And yeah, it's a different way to coach for me, but I enjoy it, and he's seeing the results. So
Yeah, that's really cool. I've had the same experience with athletes. I mean, it has to be the right fit, but yeah, I found it really productive. To just kind of define success and this is our goals for the week. This is the boxes we're trying to check, and kind of however or certainly whenever you want to get to checking those boxes in alignment with what feels right for you, go for it. And that frees up a lot of space and time. Because the fact of the matter is that those really hyper controlled training schedules, it does bring a lot of pressure, and so for particular people, and I found certainly, maybe folks that already have a great deal of stress in their life, be it from work or whatever, a bit more flexibility is actually really nice. That kind of hyper vigilant training plan where like everything has to happen at these exact times. If you open up a little space, it actually, you end up getting a lot better results when you have a bit more flexibility and you kind of define success a little differently and you feel a lot better in the process. Again, it doesn't work for everybody, but I've certainly had the same experience, again, for myself as well as for deploying that with athletes as well. Yeah, I'm really glad you went into that. I think, I mean, that's kind of a whole, I won't get us in the weeds, but I mean, that's one of the things for me that I think has been the most dramatic change in my kind of coaching practice and philosophy is using all of these tools and resources and things we have as a complement to really just like understanding the person, and asking questions that help me just understand who these individuals are. Like, I understand that you are an athlete and we have these goals, but you're also a complete person with lots of other things that are going on in your life, and lots of other goals and responsibilities and so on. So, yeah, that's awesome. What's your what was your biggest takeaway, just to be specific, when you did the year, kind of following like Killian's approach for Leadville? What was the standout difference between when you'd had, a very kind of hyper focused or more organized training approach to that year, looking back, like, what was there anything you're like, this was a major difference, or this look, felt better for me, or I got these results? Like, was there something that really stood out between those two, specific to your experience?
I, for me, like you said, I think it was a little bit more relaxing, meaning that, I didn't have a to-do checklist, hey, you have to do this workout on Tuesday, then this one Wednesday and Thursday. And I would kind of go into the week like that. But as things change, or, life changes, or family, or having to pick the kids up at school, or something to that effect. And it's, and just being okay with, that it doesn't have to happen on this specific day at this specific time. Um, and yeah, in the end, I was able to accomplish what I felt like I needed to be ready for the event. Um, so yeah, in the end, it worked out fine.
Yeah.
So um, I haven't. I've kind of done a little bit of that since, but nothing, long term, like I did then. Or, long term meaning I agreed to it in February, and then I had till August to kind of prepare myself. So, which is a lot of preparation. That's probably the hardest thing, is signing up for events like that. Is like, it's a lot of work. It's,
Yeah.
you have to go out and do some big rides. There's no way around it, unless you're not going to hold up to your part of the bargain, whether that's a bargain with yourself and you trying to get your best performance, or at this point, me being able to be there with my athlete, the whole way, and make sure he's fine. So,
Yeah, for
but
sure.
yeah, I don't, nothing stands out more than just, I thought it was more fun for me, and try some crazy things. I did this one protocol, trying to remember the name of the guy that came up with this. Uh, it's where you do these 13 intervals of 30 seconds long, and they're 15 seconds off, and you do 13 in
Mhm.
a row, then you rest 10 minutes, you do another 13 or another set, then rest 10 minutes, and you do another set. This is called Ronestads. I think Ronestads. It's a Norwegian author. He was showing that you got some benefits from this. So I did that, and so I've experimented on myself a few times, with some interval work at different intervals, and I did this. You do it for 5 days in a row, which is just not fun.
Nice. That's cool. I hadn't heard that.
And then after that, you do it once a week, and then all the rest of your rides are like zone 1, 2. And so you do this for about 6 weeks, and every time I've done it, I've shown some positive results from it. So that's how I started off my training, for Leadville. Was, I'm going to give myself a little boost in power, from where I was at the time, and then kind of move from there. So just going through that part of the process of trying something different and new, and that was fun. Except for the first week of it is pretty intense, um,
Yeah,
but after
that's
that,
brutal.
it's only once
I'm
a
gonna,
week of pain, and
I'm gonna look that up. That's really cool. I've heard bits and pieces of that, but I didn't know the full like protocol of the like how it's structured. So, um, that's that's really neat. Yeah, it's cool to open up doors like that, just to like have opportunities for new things. Something like that might not fit or probably wouldn't fit in like a more, traditional training approach with traditional periodization. And, if we just kind of laid out what we knew works from February to August for Leadville prep, it probably wouldn't include 5 days of 13-second intervals and that whole protocol. So that's cool. I mean, that's one of the things I find most exciting about continuing to be an athlete is just the like experimentation. I'm the same way. I'm always game to just experiment on myself. I'll try something. I'll try anything, just to see if it. I mean, within reason, as long as I'm not going to hurt myself. But as being a student of the sport is really fun, and I think it does to circle back or to tie it into what we were just talking about. I think it does give you a lot more like awareness and a lot more tools to be able to, like you said, to know thyself, right? You can do that and understand like more about your body and how it responds and adapts and what it feels like to be tired or to be like, oh, that didn't go well, right? Like, oh, geez, I'm not sleeping, or I'm not, like you can have some of those experiences. They're not detrimental, but you can just know both sides of that, and I think it helps inform how we do things. But yeah, that's awesome, Jason. I appreciate all your insight, man. This was super fun. I could talk shop and talk training and coaching for days, but yeah, I appreciate your time, and thanks for being willing to chat. And yeah, I look forward to having you back on the show and keeping the conversation going.
Yeah, same. I really enjoy talking coaching and bikes in general, but just I think these past few years, just getting more into philosophy and how to structure coaching is really been my my key interest, and I can so anytime you want to chat, just let me know.
I love
Thanks
it.
for having
All
me.
right. Yeah, absolutely.